25 years had passed since a school bus vanished with an entire classroom inside, leaving only unanswered questions and broken families. Most people moved on, certain the truth would never surface. But one mother never stopped searching. Then one ordinary afternoon she noticed something in a photograph, something no one else had seen before. Stay with us, because what she found would unravel a mystery the world thought was gone forever. And tell us in the comments where you're watching from. The spring of 1999 in Brookhaven, Mississippi was the kind of morning that fooled you into thinking the world was safe. The sky was a soft, uninterrupted blue. Outside Holloway Elementary, Margaret Maggie Holloway stood by the chain-link fence, watching her 5-year-old son Desmond wrap both arms around his green backpack, as if it were treasure. Desmond was a boy of small rituals. He refused oatmeal, wore something green every day, and told anyone who'd listen that the old oak in their backyard was his tree guardian, a friend who whispered to him at night. Today he was buzzing with excitement. The kindergarten class, 18 black children, 1 teacher and a driver, was heading to a living history farm 2 towns over. Maggie had hesitated to sign the permission slip, but Desmond had pleaded, and she didn't want to be the mother who kept him from making memories. Before departure, the teacher lined the children up for a photo. Some grinned with juice-stained smiles. One was caught mid-sneeze. Another flashed bunny ears behind Desmond's head. Maggie waved as the yellow bus pulled out, not knowing she was watching her son disappear. By 3 p.m., parents were told the trip was running late. By 5 p.m., the school called the police. By 9 p.m., helicopters were sweeping county roads and riverbanks. There was no crash, no witness, and no sign the bus had ever reached the museum. It had vanished somewhere between departure and destination. 30 miles of asphalt reduced to a void. Maggie demanded answers. Who drove the bus? Where was the trip log? Were there toll cameras? Escort vehicles? She received vague reassurances, then silence. Official reports cited clerical errors and possible route confusion. There were no arrests, no suspects. Just a line in the local paper and a minute on the evening news. But Maggie refused to fold her grief neatly into a memorial service. She walked the routes herself, combed through ditches and creek beds, begged for access to road maintenance logs. When the school moved on, holding candlelight vigils that faded each year, she didn't stop. She marked anniversaries by wearing green, by knocking on doors along Highway 14, by mailing copies of the class photo to anyone who might remember something. Her friends told her to let go. She told them she would. When Desmond walked through her door, 25 years later, the world had changed, but Maggie Holloway's kitchen table hadn't. It was still the place where she sorted her evidence: manila folders, newspaper clippings, maps with routes traced in red ink. Most of the town had forgotten the missing bus. Maggie hadn't. She still kept 3 copies of the class photo, one in her Bible, one in her wallet, and one on the fridge. One April afternoon in 2024, while cleaning out a closet, she pulled the photo from a worn folder. She had looked at it thousands of times, but now she had something new: her phone's magnifier app. She zoomed in, scanning every detail she already knew by heart. That's when she saw it. In the bus window, just behind Desmond's head, was the faint reflection of an adult man, pale-skinned, wearing what looked like a uniform. Not the teacher, not a student. A face she'd never seen in any staff photo. She dug out the 1999 Holloway Elementary yearbook, the PTA rosters, the district transportation logs she'd copied years ago. The man wasn't listed anywhere. It was as if he'd never existed, except he was there, in her photo, on her son's bus. She took the photo to the police. They told her it was glare, a trick of the light. She knew better. For 25 years she had memorized every child, every adult, every detail of that day. She had never seen this man until now, yet somehow she knew he had been there all along. That night, she scanned the photo herself at the public library, enhancing the image until the outline of the man's jaw and eyes came into focus. Her hands trembled as she labeled the file "Unknown Male" and printed 5 copies. If the police wouldn't chase him, she would, and she knew exactly who to call. Franklin Dorsey wasn't the kind of man you found in the phone book. He was a retired cop turned private investigator, known in certain circles for chasing cases others had given up on. Maggie had seen him on a local news segment a year earlier, exposing a decades-old inheritance scam. He had a reputation for one thing she needed: results. She called him the next morning, expecting voicemail. Instead, a low, cautious voice answered. She explained the missing bus, the reflection in the photo, The years of unanswered questions. There was a pause, then the careful tone of a man weighing his next move. "Mrs. Holloway, that's a lot of years to chase a shadow," he said. "I'm not chasing shadows," Maggie replied. "I'm chasing my son. And I can pay you." 2 days later, they met in a quiet diner off the highway. Franklin was in his early 50s, with a worn suit jacket and the look of someone who had spent too many nights staring at case files. Maggie laid out her evidence. 3 binders filled with names, maps, bus routes, photocopied roster. Franklin studied the photo for a long moment before speaking. "I can run this face through a few databases. No promises, but it's a start." Within a week, he called back. The man in the window wasn't in any school district records, but he was in something else. Franklin had matched him to an old ID badge from a short-lived bus company called Magnolia Transit Services. The name on the badge, Raymond Cole, former prison guard. The company had shut down less than 3 years after Desmond's disappearance. Raymond Cole had no known address after 2001, no tax records, no traffic tickets. It was as if he'd evaporated. But Franklin had been doing this long enough to know. No one disappears completely. Franklin started where most investigators didn't, by digging through the things everyone assumed were useless. He requested archived transportation records from the state, even though he knew most had been purged years ago. He went through old property deeds, looking for names that matched Magnolia Transit's short roster of employees. Most led nowhere. But then he found something. A 1999 fuel supplier's invoice paid to Magnolia Transit by a third party, Evergreen Supply Company. On paper, Evergreen didn't exist. No business license, no tax filings. Yet for almost a year after the bus disappeared, it had been making regular, cash-only fuel purchases from the same rural gas station in Cumberland County, Kentucky. Maggie leaned forward when Franklin showed her the map. "Why there?" she asked. "Because it's remote. Mountain country. No cell towers, no prying eyes." "You could hide an army there," he said. Franklin didn't drive up himself, not at first. He hired a discreet drone operator from across the state line. The footage came back a week later, grainy at first, then clearer as the drone descended between the ridgelines. What Maggie saw made her grip the table so hard her knuckles went white. A small, self-contained village. Rows of wooden cabins, a goat pen, a vegetable garden, a single schoolhouse with a bell tower. People moved between buildings in muted earth-toned clothes, like they belonged to another century. No roads in, no cars out. Franklin paused the video at one frame. A man in his 30s, tall, lean, with skin the same warm brown as Maggie's and hair coiled in loose twists, was hauling a bundle of firewood across the yard. Even from above, his gait was familiar. Maggie's breath caught. Desmond. Franklin ran the image through facial recognition software. The result came back at 91% certainty. It wasn't perfect, but after 25 years of nothing, it was enough. The FBI didn't hesitate. With aerial footage, a location, and a probable match to a child on the National Missing Persons list, they prepared a raid. Franklin warned Maggie, "If he's there, it's not going to be like you imagine. People don't live cut off for 25 years and just come running." She nodded, eyes fixed on the paused video, memorizing every pixel of her son's face. "I've waited too long to turn back now." The convoy moved before dawn. 4 black SUVs, 2 unmarked vans, and a helicopter, low enough to rattle the treetops, wound their way through the narrow roads of Cumberland County, Kentucky. Maggie sat in the back seat beside Detective Carla Monroe, staring at the trees that pressed in on both sides. When the lead SUV stopped, there was nothing but forest ahead. Agents fanned out on foot, rifles raised, their radios crackling with short bursts of code. Then the first cabin came into view. Beyond it, hidden in a natural hollow between ridgelines, was an entire village, rough wooden houses, gardens, a goat pen, and a one-room schoolhouse crowned with a small bell tower. The place looked like it had been built a century ago and sealed off from time. Residents emerged as the agents advanced. Men, women, and young adults dressed in muted earth tones, their faces blank or wary. There were no vehicles, no power lines, no hint of the outside world. And then he appeared. Raymond Cole, gaunt now, his beard streaked with white, walked into the clearing, palms raised like a preacher opening a sermon. "They're mine," he said evenly, his voice carrying. "I saved them. I gave them peace." Maggie's hands curled into fists, but before she could speak, Detective Monroe leaned closer and whispered, "We know how he did it. Franklin found the paper trail. Maggie's eyes stayed locked on Cole. Tell me. Monroe kept her voice low. He was working for Magnolia Transit as a contracted driver. The morning of the field trip, a forged substitution order was faxed to the district. Looked official, no one questioned it. He signed in as the assigned driver, picked up the kids, and instead of heading for the highway, he turned onto an old Forestry Service road. An escort truck met him there, blocked the path behind. The bus was driven to a barn on a property Magnolia Transit leased under a shell company. By nightfall, it was stripped for parts and the shell was burned in a field. The children were told their parents had died in a fire that morning and that he had rescued them. Maggie felt the weight of every word. 25 years of questions condensed into a sequence so deliberate, so calculated, it made her skin crawl. And no one saw it, she said bitterly. Not for long, Monroe replied. He counted on the fact that cases like this, kids like yours, don't make the national news unless the right people care. It was then Maggie saw him. At the edge of the group stood a man with sloped shoulders and coiled hair, his gaze fixed on the treetops. She stepped forward, heart pounding. Desmond, she called softly. He turned. The face was older, sharper, but it was his. She knew it instantly. My name's Elijah, he said quietly. She reached into her bag and pulled out the class photo, holding it up so he could see. You're here, she said, pointing to the boy with the green backpack. That's you. I've been looking for you for 25 years. He stared at the image for a long moment. That's not me, he murmured. But halfway through, his voice faltered just enough for Maggie to know something in him had shifted. 2 hours later, the compound was cleared. The residents, 34 in total, were transported under quiet escort to a trauma center in the nearest sizable town. The facility had been prepared in advance. Private rooms, medical staff, and counselors, ready to begin the long process of untangling 25 years of isolation. Desmond was placed in a room with a single bed and a chair positioned near the window. When Maggie was allowed in, he was sitting there, watching the late afternoon sky as if memorizing every cloud. He didn't turn when she entered, but his eyes flicked briefly toward her reflection in the glass before settling back outside. She took the chair opposite him. I'm not here to argue with what you believe, she said evenly. I'm here because I've waited a very long time to see you again. His posture was rigid, his voice measured. Everything I was told says you're not real. Maggie kept her tone steady. That's the difference between a story and a life. You can live in one and not even know the other exists. But you're here now. That means there's more than one truth. For several moments, the only sound was the hum of the air vent. Then he asked, why would he lie? She didn't hesitate. Because control feels like love to people who want power. He could make you depend on him if he made you believe there was nothing else. Desmond's hands tightened on the arms of his chair. He didn't look at her, but the question that followed was quieter, less certain. And you never stopped? Not for a day, she said. I knew you were still out there. The silence that followed wasn't hostile. It was the kind of silence that comes when a wall starts to crack, not with force, but with the steady pressure of time and truth. The next morning, Maggie arrived to find Desmond seated at the small table in his room, turning a green ribbon over in his hands. It was the one he'd won in kindergarten for a potato sack race. He didn't comment on it, but he didn't put it away either. She placed a photo album on the table and slid it toward him without opening it. He hesitated, then began flipping through. Each page carried a moment from a life he didn't remember. Birthday cakes, Halloween costumes, a boy grinning with a missing front tooth. His fingers lingered on one picture of himself and another boy in a school play. Who's this? Your brother, Aaron, Maggie said. He's been waiting to see you. Desmond's eyes stayed on the photo. I don't know him, he admitted, but I think I want to. Across the hall, other survivors were speaking with counselors. Danielle Danny Rivers, once known as Grace, described the years in the compound, the rules about silence, the punishments for asking questions, the constant reinforcement that the outside world would harm them. I thought it was safety, she told her counselor. It was just another kind of prison. That afternoon, Maggie and Danny crossed paths in the hallway. They exchanged a brief nod, nothing more, but Maggie caught the faint expression in Danny's eyes, recognition, and a kind of solidarity between two people who had fought in very different ways to get out. The following evening, Desmond made his first request. He set the ribbon down, glanced at Maggie, and said, "Will you sing it?" She knew exactly what he meant. She didn't ask questions. Standing beside his chair, she began softly, "You are my sunshine, my only sunshine." Desmond didn't join in at first, but by the second line his lips were moving, shaping the words from memory. When the song ended, he stayed still for a long moment, then leaned forward until his forehead rested lightly against her shoulder. For Maggie, it was the first real sign that the boy she'd been searching for was still there, somewhere behind the years. When Desmond agreed to leave the trauma center, Maggie didn't take him to the old Holloway family house. It had been sold years ago, and she didn't want his first steps back in Brookhaven to feel like walking into a stranger's life. Instead, she brought him to her small white-clapboard home on the edge of town, a quiet place with wind chimes on the porch and a kitchen that smelled faintly of fresh cornbread. He moved through each room slowly, not touching much, just letting his eyes adjust to spaces that weren't built by Brother Ray's hand. In the guest room, Maggie had set a small box on the bed. Inside were his baby shoes, the green ribbon, and the cassette tape she'd carried for decades. He picked it up, studied it, then set it back without a word. 2 days later, Maggie drove him to Holloway Elementary. The playground was new, the paint brighter, but the stretch of blacktop where the bus had once idled was unchanged. Desmond stood for a long time, his gaze fixed on it, as if trying to will the missing hours of that morning back into place. Then Maggie led him to the far corner of the schoolyard, where the oak still stood, taller now, branches spread wide. "Your tree guardian?" she said. Desmond stepped closer, placing his palm against the rough bark. "I dreamed about this tree," he said quietly. "I didn't think it was real." "It waited for you," Maggie replied. From his jacket pocket, he took a smooth stone painted with the names of the 18 children from that day, those who had been found and those still missing. He knelt at the base of the tree, set the stone down, and then leaned the old class photo against the trunk. A week later, Maggie opened her home for the first time in years to more than just family. Around her dining table sat people whose lives had been tied together by a single morning 25 years earlier. Desmond, Danielle Rivers, 2 other survivors from the bus, Detective Carla Monroe, and Franklin Dorsey. Everyone brought something. Danny came with a basket of cornbread. Another survivor named Isaiah brought a homemade pie. Franklin arrived with coffee strong enough to fill the whole kitchen. Before the meal, Maggie tried to say grace, but her voice caught. She looked around the table, at faces she'd once only known from photographs and missing person bulletins, and said simply, "Thank you for coming home." It was Desmond who spoke next, not loudly, but with enough steadiness to draw every ear. "There were times," he said, "we were told no one would ever come for us, that we'd been forgotten." His eyes swept the room, resting on Maggie. That wasn't true. The following month, the FBI concluded its case. Cole's conviction was announced publicly, and the press asked for interviews. Desmond had been reluctant, but finally agreed to speak once, on his own terms. Standing before a cluster of microphones, he stated his name clearly, said he'd been taken when he was 5 years old, and that he'd lived most of his life under another name in a place that wasn't home. "If there are others like me," he said, "I want them to know. Someone is still looking." On the 1-year anniversary of the raid, Maggie and Desmond returned to the clearing where the compound had stood. The buildings were gone, replaced by open ground and the sound of wind moving through the trees. Desmond planted a wooden sign into the earth. The lettering was plain but certain. "This is where we were lost, and this is where we began again." In the months after the raid, 12 of the survivors were confirmed as the original children from the missing bus. The others had been taken at different times. Runaways, foster children, kids no one reported missing. Some reunited with family. Others started new lives with help from the state. Danielle Rivers became a public advocate, speaking for those still missing. Raymond Cole never testified. His conviction guaranteed he would die in prison. Maggie didn't watch him leave the courtroom. Her focus was on the life she had fought to bring back. She and Desmond found a slow rhythm in Brookhaven. Quiet mornings, careful conversations with his brother Aaron, and yearly visits to the old oak at Holloway Elementary. At its base sat the painted stone with the names of all 18 children, its colors fading, but the names still clear. One crisp autumn day beneath its branches, Desmond turned to her. "I'm here because you never stopped." Maggie squeezed his hand. The wind moved through the tree above them, its roots deep, its branches unbroken. In the end, Maggie's fight was about more than bringing her son home. It was about refusing to let the world decide when love has reached its limit. We all carry something we could give up on, yet choose to keep holding close. So, we'll leave you with this question. When everything in life tells you to let go, will you keep going until the story is finished? Let us know in the comments how this story resonated with you. If this story touched you, share it so its message travels further than we ever could alone. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.